Hey guys, do you enjoy being talked at by a person for an extended period of time on a topic they are in no way qualified to talk about? Well then you're in luck, because that's exactly what I'm about to do. As you can probably tell by the title of this video, oh, okay, maybe not. Anyway, I'm going to be talking about the native people of the Americas, specifically the people who lived here and here. A final disclaimer before I start, I'm going to try and cover literally hundreds of years of conquest and hundreds more of development of one of the least known regions of the world. I'm only one guy with some books, so, don't lynch me if I miss anything or get anything wrong. First I'm going to cover some basic information about the natives in general, and then I'll move on to the specific empires. Chances are, if you know anything about these two empires, then the first thing you will think of is the Spanish conquest. You may have been taught in school or have read a book on the subject. Anyway, the key thing is that most people are taught that the Spanish rocked up to the New World, destroyed the existing empires with superior technology, and any people not slaughtered by the Spanish were killed by introduced diseases. One of the main spreaders of this misinformation is in fact Guns, Germs and Steel, the book by Jared Diamond. I particularly like the bit where he says 80,000 Incans were defeated by only 168 Spaniards at the Battle of Cajamarca. Which sounds pretty impressive until you realise that there was probably only a ceremonial guard present at the battle, with little weaponry, and that most of the account was probably fabricated. At the time, Spanish conquistadors were being phased out for a more formal colonial bureaucracy. So it was in the conquistadors' best interest to exaggerate their accounts in order to make them seem more relevant, and to persuade the government to keep them around just a little bit longer. This account by Diamond also fails to recognise that the majority of the battles were fought by other natives in the region, as both the Aztecs and the Incans were embroiled in a civil war when the Spanish decided to partake in some hearty conquest. In fact, before famous conquistadors like Cortez and Pizarro, I really need to learn how to say names, succeeded in conquest, other conquistadors had failed at the task. The reason that the later conquistadors had any success at all was due to strategic native alliances, such as Cortez allying the Totonac to aid him in the Aztec conquest. Moving on to more specific examples, I'm going to start with the Inca Empire, the largest of the large native nations. This wasn't an empire in only name either. The lowest estimates put the population pre-Columbus at 6 million, and the highest at 12 million people. However, it's hard to put a definitive number down, probably due to the fact that most of the census records were either lost or destroyed by the Spaniards. Most don't realise that the empire was only founded in the early to mid 1400s, from a small kingdom which rapidly expanded to its height in 1525. This wasn't just a loose empire of tribes and kingdoms. There was a complex system of roads, highways, efficient taxation using a not decimal system, agriculture and, most importantly, llama herding. And all of this was achieved without having a written language. The empire was actually more of a federal system with a central government ruling over semi-autonomous quarters. Parallels could be made to the modern-day federal system in the USA, but there was a distinct lack of judiciary and codified law, so they weren't really that modernised. Another common misconception is that the natives were simply too technologically inferior to the Spanish, which is why they lost the overall conquest. People like to point out the lack of metalworking and wheels to make their point, but it can be explained pretty easily. The Inca did have metalworking knowledge, and according to accounts of conquistadors, they created beautiful gold and silver metal pieces. However, they had a distinct lack of major tin deposits in the area, and metalworking was limited to gold and silver in most cases. The Inca also had little need for bronze, as they had no animals to pull heavy metal-based equipment. You see, llamas can only hold roughly 30 kilograms, so it's a bad idea to count on them too much. The Incas were also perfectly fine killing each other with the weapons they had at the time and had no need to technologically advance. However, they did have the occasional bronze-tipped weapon, but had nowhere near the scale used in Europe. I'm going to end this section by greatly oversimplifying the Spanish conquest for time's sakes. An important prerequisite to the Spanish invasion was the fact that roughly 50% of the population had just been wiped out by smallpox, including the ruler and heir of the empire, plunging the Inca into a civil war. The Spanish just sort of picked up the pieces of a shattered empire, and by allying native factions they managed to capture the new emperor at the before mentioned Battle of Cajamarca. At this point, many people assumed that the Inca just sort of gave up and let the Spanish rule them, but it was more of a mutual understanding between the Spanish and the allied natives to co-manage the land that was conquered from the fallen empire, which evolved into total Spanish control after the Spanish increased their presence in the region. Alrighty then, time to talk about everybody's favourite human sacrificing nation, the Aztec Empire. The Aztec story had some parallels to the Inca. People greatly underestimate their technological and cultural development. I mean, they had aqueducts and a sewage system in their capital. These guys were not your run-of-the-mill savages. However, what does set the Aztecs apart is their tendency to take people from their tributary states and sacrifice them to the gods. It's also important to remember that the Aztecs were not a culturally united people, but in fact a triple alliance between three cultural groups. Unfortunately, I simply do not have the iron will to talk about the complex affair, which is the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs, but I will sum it up to the best of my knowledge in an attempt to expel any common misconceptions. One of the most common misconceptions is that the Aztecs thought that Cortes, a conquistador on an illegal mission, was a god, specifically the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. There isn't a whole lot of evidence for this claim, especially as Cortes himself never mentioned this newly obtained godhood in his letters to the Spanish government. No, this myth probably was a mixture of communication errors between the Spanish and the Aztec people, and a story perpetuated by Christian missionaries to more easily convert the Aztec people. Moving on to the Spanish conquest, it's almost common knowledge that a handful of Spanish guys were invited into the Aztec capital, where they captured their king, killed him, and just sort of took over due to how badass they were, right? This is another Inca situation where the conquistadors massively overstated their role in the conquest, when in actuality, the native Tlaxcala Confederacy did most of the fighting. As it turns out, it wasn't too hard to find people to fight against the Aztecs with their whole militarism and human sacrifice shindig. What's actually quite funny is that Cortes and his expedition had never actually seen combat before, which shows how much of the combat was native on native, and in fact not the Spanish blowing away the natives with superior guns. Well, there you have it, folks. I hope you learned a thing or two about America's secret empires, while I possibly dispelled some popular myths and outright wrong things about their rise and fall. As always, remember to like, subscribe, comment, sell your soul to me. The next video might take a bit longer due to this whole education thing I seem to have to do, so just follow me on Twitter for any updates and watch my last video for some more of my content. Well, that about does it, so I'll see you all next time.